This is another figure that we show our patients all the time. Actually, we're probably building another one of this because there's a couple issues I have with this figure. Namely, it stops at the age of 75. So I want to see this. I want to see these data extended to another 2 decades. And I realize that it's harder and harder to get those data, but I think we can estimate them. What this figure shows is really the other bookend of why we want a high VO2 max. So, the figure above and the discussion I just had a moment ago makes it abundantly clear that if you want to live a long life, you better have a high VO2 max. This figure says if you want to live a good life, you better have a high VO2 max, because this gives you a very clear all-in-one view of what actually happens as your VO2 max declines. You lose capacity. So the graph has a lot of information on here, but it can basically be distilled down into the following. You have 3 curves for the purpose of illustration. You have people in the top 5%, people right at the middle of the pack, and people in the bottom 5%. So those are the the green, black, and red curves respectively. By the way, for anybody paying attention, these data are pulled from a different data source than the previous data. I don't think this is as rigorous a data set, and therefore the numbers don't line up completely. So the 50th percentile here is not the 50th percentile elsewhere, but for the purpose of illustration, not important. The x-axis is time, of course. So as age marches along, you are watching a reduction in VO2 max, which is the y-axis, for all curves. So again, observation number 1 is, doesn't matter how fit you are, your VO2 max is going down, down, down. Again, as I said, the problem with this graph, at least one of the problems, is stops at the age of 75. And unfortunately, that deprives a patient from seeing that the curve doesn't continue along the trajectory of what came before it. It actually gets steeper. And so what you realize pretty quickly is that depending on where you want to be, and that's demonstrated by the activities on the right, you're going to need to be pretty high to avoid the fall. So what it's showing you is, hey, if you want to be able to run 10 miles an hour on flat ground, that's, you need a VO2 max in the mid to high 50s. If you want to be able to run 6 miles an hour, which is a 10-minute mile, up a very steep hill, you need to have a VO2 max of 50. And as you walk down this list, you see that the VO2 max requirement goes down as the aspiration goes down. The point that isn't really clear on this curve is, at what point does the VO2 max become sort of rate limiting for activities of daily living? And that's in the high teens, approximately. So once the VO2 max is into the high teens, we would say that you are now going to be limited in what you can do from an activity of daily living standpoint. Having studied these types of data for a very long time, I know that for myself personally, and by the way, this tends to be true for most of our patients when we put them through the centenarian decathlon exercise, most people, at least based on what they're telling you they want to be able to do in the last decade of their life, are going to require a VO2 max of about 30, so high 20s to 30 in the final decade of their life. And I mean, Nick, when you look at that, what's your takeaway if I'm telling you you need a VO2 max of 30 if you're 90?
Yeah, you better be in the 95th percentile. And
you have to be higher, right? Because the people on this graph who have a VO2 max of 30 at age 75 are going to be lower than that at the age of 90. So yeah, you have to be way above the top of the green curve at the outset. So again, like, I know people hear me say, and you've alluded to this, that, oh, Peter, he's just being kind of extreme, blah, 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 blah. No, I'm not being extreme. The data are right in front of us here. Like, if you want to be able to be completely unencumbered in the last decade of your life, you need to have a very high level of fitness when you're in midlife. And if you don't, that's okay. You have time to do it, but don't wait too long.
Yeah, it kind of is one of those things where it's like, we often joke, like, does everyone need to measure their lactate 2 times every workout? Probably not, right? Like, that might be you on like the heavy data side. But looking at VO2 max, if you want to be able to do those things, that's not like you're measuring lactate every day. That's just a black and white fact kind of written in stone.
Yep. You don't need to, I mean, we should talk about how you can train for VO2 max, but yeah, you don't need the devices to do this. Even though I like using devices.